Hi and Assalamualaikum. May I introduce my name is Nuri Izani binti Kamarudin. My metric number is CN180065 and my supervisor is Dr. Nurfiza Idris Bidalis. So today I want to present a thermal analysis of heating-pad application using the computational fluid dynamics. Okay, next for the research background. Okay, next for the research background for the flexi tank and the heating pad. So what we know, the flexi tank used as a transport bulk liquid item from one to another place. So it also used the heating pad as a support the transport bulk liquid, and we know the heating pad allow the maximum exposure to the heat source. So the steam also can properly discharge from the outlet tube and slowly increase the steam pressure in the heating pad. So they use two materials which are steel and EPDM rubber to flow the heat source through the heating pad. So the working pressure for the heating pad is 15 psi or 1 bar, and the temperature range for the heating pad is 100 degrees Celsius to 120 degrees Celsius. So the heating pad also temperature melt in 48 hours. Next for the problem statement and the objective. Next problem statement. So for the problem statement, first the heating pad process of the reheat took over 1048 hours. Take time to liquidize the liquid inside the flexi tank. Lack of the detail for the optimum capacity used for the inlet pressure. Lack of the detail optimum operating inlet pressure, and uncertainty of the regarding the heating pad thermal efficiency. For the objective is first to determine the critical thermal parameter of heating pad on different inlet pressure. Second, to compare the effects of the heat distribution with different heating pad tube thickness. Next, for the scope of study. Next, for the scope study, first the investigate focus on the heating pad as the model for the CFD simulation. Second, the heat distribution was analyzed through the various inlet pressure parameter, which are 1 bar, 2 bars, 3 bar, and 4 bar. Next, the heating pad was designed by using the CAD software. Is SolidWorks with the different thickness of the heating pad tube, which are 3 mm, 4 mm, and 5 mm. For the last, the data was establishment of the heating pad efficiency were obtained by from the CFD only. Next, for the literature review. Next, for the literature review, number 1 is heat transfer of the heating pad. So from the summary from this literature review, most of the heating pad use the same heat source. The heating pad variable built for the heat transfer to another heat source and different materials. The heat source was generated to achieve the pressure and temperature met the optimum of the heating pad. So next, for the literature review number 2. So for literature number 2 is the thermal performance. So from the summary from this literature review, the additional difference of heat transfer will be as a reference. The improvement of heat transfer will be achieved. It can be assessed the suitable of the heat transfer for the temperature and pressure. Next, for the literature review number 3 is the type of heat transfer. So from the summary of the types of the heat transfer, we're simulating the effects of the thermal load on the solid by the observing the temperature and the pressure distribution. That the way to increase the heat transfer. Heat transfer always transfer in the direction of the decreasing temperature. Okay, for the literature review number 4 is the computational fluid dynamics. Okay, based on the previous study, they used the different software in the temperature, heat source, and the materials. So first for the previous study, they used the star CCM plus and the 15 degrees Celsius for the inlet temperature. They use the electric current in the layer shell interface for the heat source and the silicon contact pad for the material use. So next for the second previous study, they use the NC's CFX 20 degrees Celsius. They use the steam improvement heat transfer coefficient for the heat source and the aluminum as the material use. So number 3 for the previous study, they use the star CCM plus. They use the heat conduction for the heat source and the platinum and gold for the material use. And the last for the previous study, they use the NCCFX and the inlet temperature is the 55 degrees Celsius and the heat source they use the heat source as heat flux and the material use is steel. So for the summary for this literature review, the plan of the study, the CFD software that we use is the SolidWorks flow simulation. The inlet for the temperature is 120 degrees Celsius and the different thickness which are 3 mm, 4 mm and 6 mm. So for the material we use the LPDE with the EPDM 60 durometer rubber. Okay, next for the methodology. First we create the flow chart for the simulation. So first we started with the literature review, geometrical modeling, meshing, and the boundary condition. From this, we create the simplify heating pad with the simplified heating pad with the placing tag. And next, the mesh ventilation, flow simulation, and analysis of result and the documentation. And for the boundary condition, we present study which the software of SolidWorks flow simulation. The inlet temperature we use at 120 degrees Celsius. Inlet pressure we use 1 bar, 2 bar, 3 bar, and 4 bar. For the type of flow, is the steady state, and the material used is the LPDE and EPDM 60 durometer rubber. So for the summary, from the methodology, the setup was applied based on the actual planning to calculate the heating pad with the SolidWorks simulation. So next for the result and the discussion. Okay, from the result, the simplified heating pad shows the flow through into inlet and the heat source will through inside the difference thickness tube until throughout to outlet. For the simplified heating pad with the freezing tank, we can see the heat transfer was predetermined critical thermal parameter of the heating pad on the different inlet pressure. So for the summary in this result, the objective of this study to analyze the temperature and the pressure distribution in the heat transfer of the heating pad. The previous study and it is to achieve a comparison between the heat source and the different thickness on the heating pad. For the geometry meshing, for the summary, mesh quality play an important role in the accuracy of the result. This software is important to examine the the measure quality of the element in the mesh. Next, for the mesh quality validation graph, the graph of the mesh quality validation shows the different mesh as a different coverage solution to the horizontal mesh. To it can see the goals value changing and the converging on the new value. So this graph shows the mesh quality of the pressure versus levels. Level refinement. So based the graph, there are slightly significant changes of the pressure with the average relative error below 1% in pressure from the level refinement between 6 to 7. So for the summary for this graph, base the value of the mesh quality validation of the geometry was achieved, and the mesh quality validation, the data and the result that has been obtained from the value of the simulation. Okay, next for the temperature distribution on the flexi tank. So what we can see, the observing the condition of the one bar inlet pressure 3 mm thickness tube of the heating pad shows the red color clearing can be seen rather than 4 mm and 5 mm. The thickness of the heating pad tube. So red color of the contour represent as the higher temperature, while the blue color represent the room temperature. So next, the increasing of the inlet pressure. The red color obviously can be seen at the thickness 3 mm of the tube heating pad. So for the summary on this table, the between three design of different thickness, the thickness of the 3 mm is more contribute to the enhancement of the overall temperature distribution. Next, the heat transfer is steady if the thickness tube more than 4 mm. Okay, next for the maximum temperature versus pressure. So what we can see based on this figure, the value of thickness tube 3, 4 and 5 is increased at 2 bar. And then the thickness tube 4 obviously increased at 3 bar, smoothly stay at the 4 bar between the 50 degree to 60 degree. So for the thickness tube 5, the increase before through the 3 bar at the 40 degree and was started increase to 50 degree at the 4 bar. So for the summary on this figure, the result this graph increased less than 4 bar, and then the difference between the pressure was achieved. Okay, next for the maximum temperature versus thickness tube. So what we can see this graph, the pressure 1 bar, 2 bar and 3 bar and 4 bar was started at the thickness tube 3 and decreased at the thickness tube 4. But the 3 bar it was decreased at the thickness tube 5 on the 40 degree. And then the 1 bar and 4 bar was decreased at the thickness tube 5, but the thickness tube 4 it was increased at 2 bar through the thickness 5. So for the summary on this graph, the value of the thickness tube show a decrease at 4 bar cause the flow suitable with the that set temperature. And then the temperature maximum versus thickness tube was achieved to compare with one the thickness tube can rapidly flow the steam at the set temperature. From the pressure losses, we calculate the value from the heating pad, and then the thickness value of the thickness was increased on the started by of 1 bar to the 4 bar. So the highest of value of the pressure losses, the thickness 3 mm get 400,000, which is the high the height of the value of pressure losses. So for the summary of this graph, the result obtained to relation between the pressure losses on the heating pad become increased with the different thickness tube, which are 3, 4 and 5 mm, and based on the pressure. Okay, next is conclusion. Okay, next for the conclusion. First, this project main this project to determine the critical thermal parameter of the heating pad and to compare the effects of the heat distribution on different inlet pressure and thickness tube. Next, the preliminary result from this study prove that the heat distribution is an effective way to for temperature melt. So this study need to be proceed with the detailed study according the parameters state in methodology and to discuss the analysis in the future study. Next, the parameter as stated in the boundary condition will be observed, and lastly is this study is significant. Thank you for your attention.